young Bobby Engels has a problem. He needs to earn the respect of his peers. So he gets the special Sega Genesis fighting system. It comes with Streets of Rage 2. He saves $40. He gets more moves. He gets more control. Now things are pretty much okay.
I said chocolate chip.
Say it. Say it.
What's up, Pressure Pals? Welcome to the first episode of Pressure Past. This is a brand new show that we're starting up to exclusively talk about the history of old games, series, consoles, lots of stuff. It's going to be really exciting to take this journey. If you've listened to any of our previous retrospectives, you kind of already know what to expect, but we're going to be doing things a bit differently. Just listen and you'll find out. For the first episode, it's Sega Month, and we'll be talking about the Beat 'em Ups of Sega. Starting all the way back with Altered Beast, going all the way to Dynamite Cop, we'll be discussing how Sega changed the genre. I'm Colin Tanner, and I'm joined by Steve Cup. Hey, Steve.
Hey, how's it going?
Fantastic, man. Now,
Glad to be back, man. It's been a while.
It has been a bit. So when I actually talked to you about this episode, you were like, "Oh, I love those." Mm-hmm. I was like, "Oh, thank God." You know, I didn't know what to expect. But so you weren't a Sega kid growing up, though, huh?
No, I was in a really weird position, actually. My friends were Sega kids. My best friend owned a Sega Genesis. My cousins owned a Sega Genesis. So I played it all the time. I only had an NES. I didn't even get a Super Nintendo until way later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was in kind of a weird position because I was still playing like Metroid and Super Mario Brothers 3 while everyone else was, buying a Virtual Boy. So
all those darn people buying their Virtual Boys.
Damn Virtual Boys. Anyways, I played a ton of the classic Sega Beat 'em Ups because, I mean, outside of, say, your Sonic the Hedgehog,
yeah,
and of course Mortal Kombat, which you had to get it on the Sega because blood.
Yeah.
We mostly played beat 'em up games. We played Golden Axe, we played Golden Axe 2, Streets of Rage 2, and
the list goes on.
Games. Yeah, the list goes on and on. When I would go to the local arcade, I would always gravitate towards beat 'em up games. They were my absolute favorite. I love the Simpsons game. I love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
And it's funny, the genre is pretty much gone now, but we have seen a revival in recent history. And I think a lot of what we take for granted with the mechanics of beat 'em ups, what actually made them awesome games, wasn't there early on. It took a little bit of work, and Sega definitely started that. Let's take it all the way back to the mid-1980s. Sega has cemented a foothold in the arcade market of America, Europe, and Japan. Games such as Outrun, Hang On, Space Harrier, and Afterburner turn heads with their interactive displays. Remember that? They would have things like motorcycles, or you'd be turning the jet and it'd be shifting back and forth, or you're in the car with the wheel. All these ideas. But the landscape was about to change with a new type of game that was coming to arcades. In fact, in 1986, Technos released, we'll try this, Neketsu Koa Kunio-kun, or Hot-Blooded Tough Guy Kunio. It would become the first of what is often referred to as a beat 'em up. In the game, players could move in 4 directions of a large area, utilizing punches and jump kicks. Kunio would fight against a gang of Japanese street toughs until reaching a more powerful boss. Every opponent would require multiple hits to defeat, with each enemy varying in power. Well, the game was a smash hit in Japan, and America and Europe would receive the game with a different title and a more Western aesthetic known as Renegade. The game would receive a multitude of ports, including the NES in 1987, and continued to be ported even as far as 1993 on the Master System before joining Virtual Console and the things we're more familiar with. But it also became a huge hit on the ZX Sinclair Spectrum, with all two beautiful colors. But nowadays, most people that play the game can beat it in less than 7 minutes. Do you remember the Kunio-kun titles, the River City Ransom? I don't know if you had a chance to play those.
Yeah, River City Ransom and Crash and the Boys.
Oh, Crash and the Boys!
Yeah, I was a big fan of River City Ransom.
Super
specifically.
Dodgeball.
Yeah. Crash and the Boys was cool too. I'm not super big into like collecting cool shit for the NES. I mostly just collect games that I play, but one of the few fully complete box games that I have is actually River City Ransom.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's really cool. And one of the reasons I picked it up, well, one, it was at a flea market for cheap, and two, it's got the coolest box art, and those games always had a wonderful aesthetic to them.
Right.
So yeah, I was a big fan of that. I didn't really like Renegade that much.
Renegade is
I always
not
chalked
a
it
good
up
game.
as like, oh, you mean shitty Double Dragon? Because
it laid the foundation, much like how we would see something like Karate Champ or the original
Urban
Street
Champion.
Fighter or Urban Champion.
Yeah.
It's laid the foundation for fighting games. None of those games are particularly good. And Renegade or hot-blooded tough guy Kunio, they're not fun. They're really boring, actually, and they take less than 10 minutes to beat, and the controls aren't very good, and the move list isn't very good. Yeah. But 1 year later, Technos Japan, the people that released that Kunio game, decided they wanted to create a new type of beat-em-up. So they focused on a game that was more refined. The game once again involved 1 or 2 players facing off against a gang. This one being called the Black Warriors Gang. That's awkward. The game was called Double Dragon, and it featured far more diversity in its gameplay. Players could pick up weapons such as chairs and bats after knocking them out of enemies' hands. Billy and Jimmy Lee could grab their opponent's hair and throw elbows instead of using the same combo over and over and over again. The game also had a dedicated jump button, something the NES port would never have. Stages include far more interactive environments such as conveyor belts, although it would include the pits that were in Renegade. Double Dragon was an even bigger hit than Kunio, with a larger fan base in Japan, Europe, and North America. Not only had the arcade game done well, but the home ports such as the NES sold out quickly. A version featuring 2 players was released to the Sega Master System. It's often considered the best home port of Double Dragon 1. Both Kunio-kun and Double Dragon would become huge, long-lasting franchises, and include other influential beat-em-ups such as River City Ransom later on. So, I mean, the original Double Dragon, once again, not the best Double Dragon. No. Not even close.
no. But again, it really improved the formula, and you can play Double Dragon now.
Oh, yeah.
And it still has it. I mean, Double Dragon 2 is definitely...
Shit.
Yeah, that still holds up.
On the NES. The arcade, I think, is kind of garbage. Because...
But yeah, if you fire up Double Dragon 2 on your NES tomorrow and you're playing with a friend, it's still brilliant. And it's weird because that was kind of the sweet spot for them, because 1 has potential, but it's definitely flawed. 3 is just a mess of a game. I haven't played that much of it. I hated it as a kid. I revisited it as a teenager and adult. Yeah, it's just bad.
But, it's funny because Double Dragon and Kunio-kun, made by the exact same developers, are still around. They still live on, which is really weird. I believe the company is now called Millions. It's no longer Technos Japan. But they really created the beat-em-up. But like you said, you could go back and play Double Dragon 1. It's just not that good. You could go back and play Renegade, but it's not that good. What we identify as the arcade beat-em-up, like the true criteria for what we consider a good beat-em-up, would be founded by a couple of different companies, and Sega, definitely one of the most important of the 3. They actually wanted to make a beat-em-up, right? Mm-hmm. Kunio-kun and Double Dragon machines were making a lot of money, and most importantly, unlike Space Harrier, unlike Outrun, unlike Hang On, they didn't require these elaborate, and even though I love those games, gimmicky setups. Those cost thousands and thousands of dollars, whereas a Double Dragon machine could really be put into, you could have multiple different games in the same cabinet, including Double Dragon, and still retain the money. Unlike Sega, unique cabinets. So they wanted to get into that market. At the same time, they were developing the Sega Genesis. They wanted to create arcade games that could be ported home. The Sega Master System had failed primarily due to, even though it would sell very well in Brazil, The Sega Master System had failed because you couldn't port these arcade experiences. How do you port, Afterburner and be really authentic? You just can't.
No, you can't. And they certainly tried. That they tried to use the 3D glasses a lot with the Master System,
man.
and that's
Space Harrier
it's something.
3D.
Yeah, Space Harrier 3D, which I have a copy of it, but
You do?
I don't. I can't find the Master System glasses, and I'm not willing to drop like $90 on them on eBay. So
Didn't they connect to the system or something?
yeah. They plugged in, and you had to buy a special version of the Master System that came with them, and then you got your 3D glasses, and you could play the 3D games. But I have 3D Zaxxon, and I have.
Was there a built-in game with that Master System? I want to say, like if you turned it on without a game, I think there was like a 3D maze game.
Yeah, there is a maze game. I don't know if it's 3D or not. So yeah, I'm not sure. I've never been able to play them in 3D, but that was kind of how they pushed it because they couldn't replicate the exact arcade experience with Space Harrier. So they were like, 3D.
And especially because Space Harrier requires like a joystick, and they had that horrible D-pad.
Mm-hmm.
But they're working on the Sega Genesis, and they're saying, okay, we've got to take some franchises that can be ported to this system. We can use arcade as advertising to bring in home console buys because they're developing right now the Super 16 arcade hardware. They would need more traditional buttons, and they would need impressive graphics. In 1987, a 32-year-old designer named Makoto Ushida joined Sega and their AM1 studio. He was tasked with creating software for a Sega System 16 arcade board. The main CPU clocked in at 10 megahertz.
Yeah, that's like a wristwatch.
The MCU at 8 megahertz. And that GPU featured 12.5 megahertz sprite line buffer render clock and 6.29 megahertz sprite line buffer scan erase and pixel clock. Oh man, sprites could be coming and going, and no one would even notice. Little is actually known about Makoto Ushida. Ushida was born in 1955 and still works for Sega. By all accounts, he sounds like a very shy and enthusiastic man, kind of like a traditional geek, He rarely gives interviews, and if he does, he's more inclined to talk about what he's working on now rather than what he did then. Thankfully, we do have a lot about Golden Axe, which would be awesome. What we do know is he loves movies, specifically the 1981 film The Howling. I don't know if you've ever seen The Howling.
Oh, I own it. I'm a big fan.
It's a cult classic.
How
would could you describe The Howling to the audience?
It's kind of a campy werewolf movie. Obviously, The Howling. I think it's most notable for its really cool transformation sequences.
Oh man, so cool! YouTube that right now. It's like that and Werewolf in London are sweet.
Yeah, those are both, and they both came out around the same time. But yeah, it's just it's a gory, campy horror movie. Great practical effects.
Totally, but like it's bad in a really great way, and then there's parts where it's great in a really great way. But there's a reason it's a cult classic.
Walks a fine line, and you can definitely see where it informed his game design.
Absolutely, sure. Though his name would actually never appear in the credits. His first role was as primary designer of Jun Oki, or Altered Beast.
Rise from your grave.
The team would contain 11 men. Altered Beast would be a simple side-scroller, but its graphics would impress many at the arcades. Let's talk about the story, Steve.
What is the story? Because I thought it was just...
Rise from your grave.
It takes place in a world ruled by Greek gods. After Athena is kidnapped by the demon god Neph, Zeus commands the dead Roman soldiers to...
Rise from your grave!
Or wise from your grave. It's really... It depends if you're playing the arcade or Genesis version, really. The dead soldiers are tasked with retrieving his daughter and defeating the bald-headed demon Neph and his horde of monstrous minions. Locations would take place in graveyards, where you're resurrected, all the way to the underworld and the city of Dis. Players could high punch, low kick, and jump while fighting zombies, dragons, bees, and bipedal unicorns. It was a weird game. But of course, the most important element, I'm sure you know this very well, there were blue orbs that would fly through the stage. If you collected them, you would power up. Eventually, if you collected 3 of them, your soldier would transform into a variety of beasts with unique abilities, from a wolf which could do that weird jet thing, to a dragon that could shoot electricity. You could fly in that stage. A bear, a tiger, and a golden wolf. Did you have a favorite out of these?
I was always a big fan of the wolf because when I played this game as a kid on the Sega Genesis, I never really made it far enough to see a lot of the stuff. Yeah, I was pretty terrible at it. And it's funny, too, because it's a real testament to the personality of Altered Beast. Most people that experience Altered Beast didn't play it in an arcade setting. They played it as, here's a pack-in game for the Sega Genesis.
The very first pack-in game for the Sega Genesis.
First, yeah.
In North America.
In North America. So, when you would play Altered Beast, it was stiff. It was kind of tedious.
Yeah.
The gameplay, it just wasn't there. And I'm not even saying, like, as a relic of its time, it wasn't there.
No.
I mean, I was playing this, and I was a young child, and this is something I should have been... I was like, I don't know. It wasn't that great. But the personality in that game was just unprecedented. It was great. It was so cool. Like, when you heard the voices, and you were just like, oh my god, and then you would transform, and it was just amazing. It was something you wanted to show your friends, basically. It was a showpiece.
It's funny you say that, because the transformation scenes were actually met with resistance by Sega. Oshida actually had to talk with them. Here's a quote from him. How much can you jam into a 5-second sequence? For example, even in the autoplay of the old version, only the character's eyes transform. Knowing that an eye itself can be shocking, we did a close-up shot of the eye transformation. I wanted to make detailed expression of something shocking, rather than atrocious. These scenes are pretty popular in America. It was worth it for me to put up such a fight, so to speak. And I think that's absolutely true. If you think back, you think of the fire and the blue background and the person just like howling, and then the fucking wolf, and then suddenly the music kicks up. Wow. Even though, like you said, it's not a good game. I love it. I will play it. I will have a lot of fun. In my heart of hearts, I know it's only nostalgia. I know I'm lying to myself, and I'm okay with it. I love Altered Beast. But it also came out on the Sega Master System, PC Engine CD, Famicom, Atari ST, ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, Commodore Amiga, and DOS. And like you said, Sega was so impressed, they made it the very first pack-in game. Funny story, if you beat the game, it actually reveals a meta-story. All along, it's been a film production. There's a point where the soldier and Athena are laughing at one of the monsters that was flying in the game as it's attached by strings. And then it cuts to an image of the game creators with their eyes blacked out. It's very, very strange.
That's bizarre.
Absolutely. Well, so I mean, Altered Beast, should you play it, Steve?
Yeah, I think you should. Just because it's
should you
kind
pay to play it?
No, I wouldn't do that. I mean,
I knew there was something else to this.
But the cool thing about Altered Beast is you don't really need to. I mean, if you have a friend with a Sega Genesis, if you have one of those like plug in and play Sega systems, if you have Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, like you can find Altered Beast anywhere.
I mean, it really was re-released so often. It's on Xbox Live, it's on PSN, it's on Virtual Console. It's everywhere.
It really is everywhere. So yeah, I mean, it's worth playing. It's a piece of history, and it's interesting as a timepiece. And even though it's stiff and it's not that fun because it's so mechanically awkward, it's cool. It's a triumph of looks over functionality.
I think it's really interesting, too, to hear about this game designer who didn't really make his first influential game until he was 32. Like, nowadays, it's like, well, I got this 23-year-old guy, he's making amazing games. Even back then, it was the same way when you read about, like, when Miyamoto was working on stuff.
Sure,
and this 32-year-old guy just makes his very first, like, directs his very first game, like, game design. And, you know, it shows. It shows it's his first game. It's not good.
A little rough around the edges.
Here's the funny thing. I have so many quotes from him in the next part. I had to take them all because we'll never hear quotes from this guy again, because he had to work on another game for Sega. They said, this is a huge hit. What do you got next? Here's what we got. This is from Retro Gamer. They're the only guys that could find an actual, like, real interview with him where he's not talking about some modern game. When we reached the final stages of development on Altered Beast, our boss asked our team to come up with a new game. The given proposal was an action game that ran on Altered Beast System 16 arcade board with similar gameplay to Technos Double Dragon, which was a popular arcade game at the time. My idea was to come up with a Double Dragon that was not a Double Dragon. Technos was an experienced rival who had been working on the Kunio-kun series, so there was no way we could compete if we did the same thing as them. I had a feeling that arcade games should be competitive against the great hit console title Dragon Quest, created by Enix, and therefore studied the world of magic and swords, combined this within the gameplay of Double Dragon, and finally came up with the concept for Golden Axe. Oh yeah, Golden Axe, man. We're getting to it. My father loved action movies. I used to watch them with him. During the development of Golden Axe, I rented a video of Conan and watched it until the tape was worn. Of course, I was also inspired by Lord of the Rings. I bought many illustration works based off Middle-earth and used them as reference material. If I could, I would vote Gandalf for president. You see what I mean about being a nerd? I would vote Gandalf for president? Are you serious? I don't get it. Anyway, there were 3 different protagonists. Gillis Thunderhead, he was seeking revenge for his murdered twin brother. Axe Badler, a male human with a broadsword and earth magic, seeking revenge for his mother's murder. And Tyrese Flare, another human with a longsword and fire magic, seeking revenge for both her parents' murder. Yeah.
I see a theme here.
Yeah, there's a lot of revenge. They would fight through the land of Uri to kill Death Adder, the man responsible for all their family's murderers, who also happened to kidnap the king and his daughter. Players would fight against skeletons, orcs, humans, as well as beasts like Chicken Leg, a giant scorpion-like chicken, and Cockatrice, a fire-breathing dragon with a pretty funny name. Both appeared in Altered Beast as well. In between stages, bonus rounds would allow players to knock health and potions from a small gnome. Here's the thing about Golden Axe that I think we can both talk about here is if you picked one of those characters, they were substantially different. Tyrese was really fast. Axe Badler, who didn't have an axe, he had a sword. He was more kind of like middle range. And, the dwarf was kind of slow but had a lot of power. And you had different types of magic. Man, did you play a whole lot of this?
I played a lot of Golden Axe, and Yoshida, he's kind of like a Suda51 figure to me, where, again, he uses his style to compensate for the flaws and overly simple nature of his games.
Absolutely.
So, one of the things that drew me to Golden Axe was, again, the aesthetic of the game. The whole sword and sandals and high fantasy stuff was really, really popular then. A lot of, direct-to-video B-movies were that sort of Conan ripoff stuff. So I love those movies as a kid.
It was if you had to release a game like this, that was the time.
That was the exact time, and it's definitely a product of its time. And there's a lot of little touches in there. You mentioned the varied characters. That was cool.
Magic.
The magic was
abilities.
Really, really cool. And again, it kind of had that sort of shocking wow factor to it, just sort of like the Altered Beast transformation.
It's total sense of place. You really felt like you were in a different world from all other video games, that it was well thought out, you know?
Golden Axe is really special to me because it was one of the first times where I felt I was able to game the game in a way. So I was able to kind of subvert its flaws in order to succeed.
Uh-oh, what'd you do?
So one of the things that Golden Axe, I'm pretty sure it's notorious for this, but the enemy AI is awful. It is really, really bad.
Yeah.
And I noticed when I was a kid and I'd be playing this game with my cousins, the enemy AI would work on kind of a pathfinding system. So wherever you were, they would take the shortest route to where you were at. And it seems like, okay, if you're designing a game, that seems like a pretty simple way to do things. But Golden Axe had different terrain, and there'd be pits and things you could fall into. So all you would do is, if you saw a level with a pit, you'd go up to the side, and so the skeletons or whoever was coming at you would just walk towards you into the pit, and you just kill them.
Yeah.
So it was one of the few times where, unlike a lot of the Nintendo games I'd play where I just felt like it was unfair, it was too hard, and these games were working against me, Golden Axe was tough, but I could outthink Golden Axe, and that was a really cool moment for me when I was younger.
That, like you said, when you're playing Double Dragon, when you pick up a pipe, it feels really cool. When you have the chain, it feels really cool. Well, this whole game, you're going to have an axe. You're going to have a sword. And what are you going to have as a power-up? Creatures. Like the chicken leg and that dragon, you would literally knock enemies off, and you would ride them, and you would shoot fire, and you would whip people. And the designs on the chicken leg, just one of the greatest. He looks like a chicken nugget mixed with a scorpion. It's so cool. So cool. I mean, those beasts, if you were playing 2-player, You were probably yelling at each other because you wanted the beast, you know?
Oh, yeah, you would fight over those. That was definitely... We would argue all the time over who got to ride the beast.
And also, you got to fight on top of giant birds, giant turtles, go through forests, go through castles, all the way until you reached Death Adder, knocking his axe into the air and landing into his own chest, killing him and freeing the king and the princess. I guess they never called her the princess. They say it's the king's daughter. I mean, that's a princess, right? I don't know. I haven't really looked into this. But the game was just so awesome because it was so much faster than Double Dragon. Like, you could, like, sprint and knock people, and if they were on the ground, you were hitting them over the head with, like, the staff of your sword, like, bashing their head in. It was really violent, but it was never scary. It's kind of hard to explain. Like, it was so inviting that everything felt like it was a part of nature. In fact, Yoshida actually commented once, why is there, like, lightning and earth and firepower? Why not water? And he goes, well, water gives life, so we can't do that. It's like, wow.
That makes perfect sense.
You've really thought about this.
Another thing, and it's just one of the little touches that makes Golden Axe so cool, is your death scream when you die.
Oh, yeah.
Which, it's a brilliant, brilliant sound effect, and just to hear that come out of your Genesis, it's just, oh my god, it's
that
great.
FM synthesizer, man.
Yeah, it's something where I would seriously say, go on YouTube and hunt it down just so you can hear it. It's such a cool sound.
Here's a quote from Yoshida here. We adjusted the swing so the characters could not attack too far. We had to draw the playable characters small, but instead we made the boss and enemies and magic effects huge. And that's true. Your magic effects took up the whole screen. It was awesome. Just awesome at the time. It was a real powerhouse. And if you had a Genesis, more than likely you had Golden Axe. It became a huge phenomenon, released to a plethora of systems, once again, not just Genesis systems. And so, Yoshida began to develop a sequel called Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder, which was only released in arcades in 1992. We're going a little out of sequence here. This is what's weird about it. It included improved graphics, you actually had multiple pathways, and a magic ability to regain health, which is kind of cool. Wow, one of the characters could grow apples, and then the other characters could eat them. Golden Axe 2, on the other hand, was on the Sega Genesis, released in 1991, and was made with a different team, not including Yoshida. The game was more or less a rehash of the previous Genesis port, but it did include an all-new duel mode, which was kind of popular in beat 'em ups at the time, where you could fight each other, and the game received mixed reviews. I didn't really ever... Golden Axe 2 I thought was really fun when I was a kid, but as time has gone on, it's like, yeah, this level design, like the world you're going through, it doesn't feel like you're progressing. It just feels like fire stage and, I don't know, a castle stage. And did you play a whole lot of Golden Axe 2?
Yeah, I played it when I was younger, and I own it now, just because, got it cheap at a flea market.
Yeah.
And you're right, it doesn't have that sense of flow that the first game has. A great way to kind of think about it is when you play Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2.
Right.
So when you play Dark Souls 1, one of the cool things is the world feels connected.
Totally.
And you can stand in places in Dark Souls 1 and see other places, and anywhere that you can see, that's a place you can go to. And everything feels like it's all coming together. Whereas Dark Souls 2, you kind of lose that, and you just feel like there's just these little hubs that aren't necessarily connected to one another.
Yeah, like in the first Golden Axe, the first part of the new stage would have a little bit of the last stage. You'd maybe 3 feet where you'd be like, oh, I recognize this from the previous stage before I enter here. So you'd be walking off the giant bird going towards the bridge. And every stage showed a map where you were going next. So it felt like there was a continuity in the adventure. Whereas, it didn't quite work.
Golden Axe 2, it plays the same. It has the same stupid AI.
Yeah, it does.
It's largely the same game, but it feels like a Golden Axe cover band. Something's missing. It's definitely missing some heart, I guess you could say.
Definitely missing Yoshida. But Sega tried one last time with Golden Axe 3. It included a new villain, Daemon Hellstrike, and a new cast of heroes who just happened to heavily resemble the original cast. The game attempted to change the gameplay with blocking, throwing attacks, sweep attacks, and a new grappling system. But when it was received with negative reviews in Japan, it was never released worldwide. The only time you could play it outside of Japan in an English translation was in 1995 on the short-lived Sega channel. I've never played this.
Nope.
No, nothing.
No. I mean, I'm sure I've played it like on an emulator or something before. But
what?
A what? Oh no, those don't ever use those.
No.
And I've seen Let's Plays of it on YouTube, but no, I've never played it.
You're taking money out of Sega Channel.
Yeah, right, I am.
In case you don't know, Sega Channel was a streaming service way ahead of its time, almost akin to like PlayStation Now, where it would download it onto like a special cart. You could only hold one game at a time, and it would take a long time to download, even though the games were significantly smaller. The internet just wasn't there. You'd only go through your cable operator, and it just wasn't very popular in the United States. Nope. Of course,
you could play Golden Axe 3, and you could play Mega Man: The Wily Wars. So
that's true.
That's it.
Oh man, good man. I actually played the Wily Wars. Not as good as the NES one. Not as good. But they did have other games in the series. There was Golden Axe Warrior on the Sega Master System, which was a wholesale ripoff of the original Legend of Zelda. It received very low reviews. Then there was Axe Battler, a Legend of Golden Axe on the Game Gear. An RPG with side-scrolling combat.
Similar to Legend of Zelda 2?
Kind of. It would have the top-down perspective of Legend of Zelda 1, but you would enter these combat sequences that would be side-scrolling. Oh my god, that is just like the Legend of Zelda 2. I didn't realize it until you said it. And then in 1994, there was Golden Axe The Duel, which was trying to cash in on Samurai Showdown. It featured a camera that would zoom in and zoom out as two opponents fought each other, and it received okay reviews. I've never played that one either. Anything?
I've played it.
On the Saturn or in the arcade?
Yeah, it was in the arcade that was in my town, which is weird because I remember it and I saw it and I thought it was going to be a beat 'em up, and then it wasn't. And there was a group of people who always would be like around the like the Street Fighter cabinet and things like that. And also Primal Rage was very popular.
Yes, it was. You gotta make that heart explode.
That's right.
The Earth turns into the shape of a dinosaur shooting a fireball.
The Golden Axe fighting game was never popular, and the only reason I can think of, because I mean Primal Rage isn't good either, but that still had a lot of people playing it. Mortal Kombat people played it. Killer Instinct, Street Fighter. I guess it was too complex for the Golden Axe player, and not complex enough for the standard fighting game players. So it was just kind of in the middle. It couldn't really commit. And so nobody really liked it.
Yeah, and it's not like Sega at this time is particularly known for their fighting games. They would have Virtual Fighter come out shortly afterwards, but that was what got attention there was its 3D graphics. This was a not very impressive sprite-based game, and like you said, you're looking at these claymation Primal Rage characters, realistic Mortal Kombat, or hyper-detailed sprites like Samurai Showdown on the Neo Geo or Street Fighter 2. Mm-hmm. There was just no place for it, but it did come out to the Saturn in 1995 and received mixed reviews. But in 2008, one last time, Golden Axe Beast Rider was a 3D hack-and-slash game featuring Tyrese Flair. I played a little bit of it. That was awful. It felt like God of War without anything happening. It's hard to explain. You could ride beasts, a number of beasts, but it really didn't feel like it had anything to do with Golden Axe.
Yeah, I can't say I ever played that one.
Well, Yoshida attempted to replicate his success with Golden Axe when he created Alien Storm in 1991. The two-player beat-em-up featured a futuristic setting and starred a human named Karen, who used a flamethrower, another human, Garth, and a robot named Scooter. The three ran a hot dog cart called Alien Burgers. No reason why. That should be called Alien Burgers. But when the aliens attack, they become the Alien Busters. The game included static first-person shooting, and at the end of the game, a panel would judge your performance. One of the panel members was Gilius Thunderhead, the dwarf from Golden Axe. While the game did receive positive reviews, it never garnered much popularity compared to Golden Axe or even Altered Beast. Did you ever play Alien Storm?
No. I never played Alien Storm. I know it exists only because I think it's been released. Was it released on the Wii, or am I thinking it's Alien Syndrome maybe? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I do get those confused a lot.
Yeah, I know. I've never played it before. And it's, I don't know, it's a shame that he sort of has this trend in his career where a lot of his games get forgotten, and some of those games are really good. You mentioned earlier The Revenge of Death Adder.
Oh, yes.
Which I just want to chime in real quick.
Yeah, well, we're ending the Golden Axe segment, so what's the best Golden Axe?
Revenge of Death Adder.
Is that right?
Which, no questions asked.
Why?
It's absolutely incredible. And it's a real testament to Sega's bungling in the mid-90s, the fact that this never came to American home consoles. The gameplay is faster and tighter than any of the other games. There's way more beasts to ride. The character selection is incredible. All the characters feel really unique. There's branching paths that you can take. It's gorgeous. It's the only Golden Axe game where you look at it and you go, holy shit, that actually looks really great. And one of the coolest things that they did, it has this kind of like Mode 7-esque effect to it, where every once in a while you'll kind of you'll switch into like a pseudo 3D perspective and kind of move like on the Z-axis. There's like some depth to it every once in a while.
About as much depth as they get going in 1992.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was a 32-bit arcade game too, which was a big fucking deal back then.
One of the first on the Sega 32-bit arcade system.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you can't port that to the Genesis without fucking things up. But you've got Sega CD, you've got 32X, you've got the Saturn, you have all these things that come out one right after the other. And it would have been nice to bring that game, maybe to the Saturn would be awesome, but instead you bring your Golden Axe one-on-one fighting game to that, and that's just, it doesn't make any sense.
That is probably a good way to wrap up the Golden Axe segment, is that this game, the best in the series, has, as far as I know, never been released on Virtual Console, never been released on Xbox Live, while these other games have been re-released. And it's a real shame, because Death Adder and the first one are the only games that Yoshida would be involved with. Yoshida went off and made Alien Storm, and that didn't do so well. So then he made Death Adder and Revenge of Death Adder, and that also just didn't do very well. But they continued to try and milk Golden Axe. And one of the reasons why these sequels could not live up to the beat 'em up genre at that time was because of Capcom. In 1989, Capcom released Final Fight, originally known as Street Fighter 89. Before porting it over to the Super Famicom in 1991. Final Fight continued the template that Double Dragon and Kunio-kun popularized, a series of Street Fighters against a gang. Sega would need to create their own series to combat against Final Fight, though it would eventually see release on Sega CD in 1993. Sega tasked the 27-year-old game designer Noriyoshi Oba in designing a game for their now popular Sega Genesis. Oba had success when he directed The Revenge of Shinobi for the Genesis. He would later go on to help develop Clockwork Knight, Skies of Arcadia, the PS2 Shinobi, and Blood Will Tell. Oba would do his best to emulate Sega's prior successes while incorporating more traditional aesthetics and stories. Bare Knuckle, or Streets of Rage, would feature three protagonists: Axel Stone, a former detective turned dojo owner, Blaze Fielding, also a former detective, and Adam Hunter, a former boxer and a former detective, as they fought back against the evil Mr. X and his gang. Each played slightly differently. Alex was all around good, Blaze was fast but weak, Adam was slow but powerful. Players could throw knives and bottles as well as smash boxes to find health. A special attack would summon a bazooka-wielding cop car that would rain down fire and defeat all standing enemies. Enemies would juggle fire, use whips and knives, while brawlers would feature multiple different types of martial arts. At the end of the game, players could choose to join the evil Mr. X, defeat him, or, in one hidden ending, become the boss of the crime syndicate themselves. Now, this game had one special feature, and that was the music. Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima provided this hugely influential soundtrack for the game. The music utilized the Mega Drive's FM synthesizer to produce electronic house dance music long before the music would become popularized. It is often considered one of the best soundtracks of all time, along with their work on later Streets of Rage titles. Yuzo Koshiro is often cited by chiptune musicians as a game changer. So, Streets of Rage, Part 1. How much experience did you have with this one?
I played a lot of Streets of Rage. A lot of Streets of Rage. I still play a lot of Streets of Rage and
Me
Streets
too.
of Rage 2. It's one of those games where if people come over and they want to play retro games, and they're digging through my closet or whatever, that's one of the things they're almost guaranteed to pull out. Let's play Streets of Rage.
Do you have the Streets of Rage cart, or do you have the Sega Smash Pack, or whatever it was?
Oh, I have original carts for 1 and 2.
Lucky duck, because that Sega Smash Pack just, crushed the music. It didn't sound nearly as good.
Yeah, the music is it's incredible, and there's so many cliches that are associated with Genesis music, and it's always charming because of that weird audio chip.
They brought the bass.
But it brings
They brought the bass.
Streets of Rage is a game where it pushes the Genesis, as far as music goes, beyond anything. That I think that's the peak. Streets of Rage 1, I mean, I guess the counter argument would be Streets of Rage 2 is better.
And you could say things like Sonic the Hedgehog had certain songs, but chances are one of those two guys made that song you thought was so special in Sonic or any other series. Like, they were the best. Now, I do want to separate a bit. Koshiro is the guy. He's the guy that everybody loves. Yeah. Whereas Kawashima is the lesser, though he also contributed a great deal of music to the game. But when people talk about the music, they're talking about Koshiro.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Sonic the Hedgehog, which there's plenty of catchy Sonic the Hedgehog songs where if you heard them, you'd know them instantly. You can kind of hum along to them, and you know the tunes. See, there you go. Streets of Rage isn't necessarily like that.
No.
Where it's not something you're going to be tapping your toe to and humming along with, but it's one of those things where you're listening to it and you just stop and go, wow.
Yeah.
It really sticks out.
It's not designed to be sung or hum. It's designed to make you active. And when you hear that music, it engulfs your world and it puts you into the game. Like, more so than anything else about Streets of Rage, I think that music is what compels you to go forward. I'm talking about in the original here. I mean, it would be pretty traditional in its ideas. You're just fighting on the street, basically almost like Final Fight. Maybe a little bit grittier, a little bit darker, but it wasn't the best in the series, because we're about to get to the best in the series. But if you go back, there's still something to it. It takes you and gives you a sense of place. Very important, and it delivers. Of course, you've got to stop Mr. X and his street gangs. And you've got to use your bazooka car.
Oh, yeah. One more thing on the music. I can't remember where I read this. It was a long time ago, but it always kind of stuck with me. But I remember the composer for Streets of Rage, he said that he wanted to push the Sega Genesis so hard that he actually wrote his own program to create the music in.
He did in a later game.
In a later game?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But that is an excellent mentioning of his obsession with music.
Because, he wanted to push the Genesis beyond what it could do, so he didn't even use the dev tool, which is insane to think about. Like, who would possibly do that? Think about that now. Like, someone's using the Unreal 3 engine, and they're like, sounds not good enough.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm going to make my own just for the music.
Yeah, it doesn't look good enough. I'm going to do my own thing here. That's crazy. Like, nobody does that.
And when you talk about music design in cartridges, you are talking about you have to be frugal in your use of memory, because if you have too much, it won't fit on the game, or if you are too barren, it'll ruin the game. Music is such a huge component, and he knew what to do. And it really felt like he was not designing music out of nowhere. He actually felt like he was looking at the game and translating it into feelings. It was how you felt when you played the game. It was crazy.
I think when people talk about video games, especially retro video games, there's a tendency to sort of separate the way it looks, like, the game looks great, but it's an old game, so it doesn't play well, and then the gameplay, and how the gameplay is central to everything. But I like to think of it like when you have a good game, or how a game functions. It's a combination of how it looks, how it sounds, its narrative elements, and how it plays. It's everything working at once. It's you interacting with the machine and through the television. It's a whole ecosystem of shit going on.
Yeah.
Streets of Rage is a wonderful example of this, because it's got this cool look. It sounds amazing. The gameplay, the actual fighting itself, it's pretty generic, but it gets the job done. But there's just all the little touches again, just like Golden Axe. You mentioned before the cop shooting the bazookas.
Right.
And one of the best things about it, too, and this always stuck out to me, if you played through the game with two players and you get to the very end, you have this option where you can either choose to fight Mr. X, or you can kick the shit out of your friend and join Mr. X, which is just wild to think about that as a choice in a game. Like, as a narrative choice, that is insane.
Now, Double Dragon, you had to actually fight each other to see who was going to take the girl home. That's just how the game ended. But this was actually someone could betray you. There was an option for betrayal, or we can have the good ending. And man, after working together for an entire game, how evil is that where you go, you know what? No good ending. I want to work for the evil boss.
Mm-hmm. It's a really bold choice, and it kind of brings the intensity of the game into your living room. Like, you actually have to have a conversation with the person next to you. You have to actually consciously choose to betray your friend. That's crazy shit.
Streets of Rage had delivered a hit for Sega. Its detailed sprites, tight gameplay, and revolutionary soundtrack made many consider it Final Fight superior. Sega was so impressed by the success of Rage that it fast-tracked a sequel to be released only a year later. Once again, Noriyosho Oba would direct, and the music would be composed by Yuzo Koshiro and Morihito Kawashima. Streets of Rage 2 starts 1 year after the defeat of Mr. X. All three characters unite to celebrate their victory. The next day, however, Adam is kidnapped by the somehow still alive Mr. X. Now Alex and Blaze must join forces with Adam's younger brother, Eddie Skate Hunter, a rollerblade-wielding teenager, and Max Thunder Hatchet, a pro wrestler whose design was more than likely inspired by Max Hagar from Final Fight, to free Adam from Mr. X. Streets of Rage 2 would remove the cop car attack and replace it with special attacks for each character. Alex's famous uppercut would make its first appearance in Streets of Rage 2. Enemies would now feature their own health bar and name, such as Y-Signal, Galisa, Donovan, Brash. Your enemies would be robots, bikers, jetpack-wearing martial artists, and ninjas, each with their own moveset. While the first Streets of Rage mostly took place in traditional city locations, Part 2 would spice up their environments. One point of the game takes place in an amusement park, with a pirate ship stage and a sci-fi stage deeply influenced by the film Aliens. It included large blue eggs and an evil hydraulic alien robot head as a boss. Other locations include a baseball stadium with a secret underground tunnel or a piano bar. The final stage includes a long elevator ride to the top of Mr. X's building on his own private island. Environments were also littered with breakable items such as boxes, chairs, tables, and arcade cabinets labeled Bare Knuckle, each containing health items, weapons, or money. Streets of Rage 2 was a huge critical and financial success across the world, even in European territories, despite a slow 50 megahertz transition. Composer Yuzo Koshiro's music became a phenomenon in Japan. Kojiro was often hired to DJ the music of Streets of Rage 2 at popular nightclubs. To this day, Streets of Rage 2 is often regarded as the best beat 'em up of all time and one of the greatest games ever created, even though Famitsu would rate the game 26 out of 40. Wow. That's gotta be ridiculous. The critics don't always get it right, apparently.
It's pretty great. It's everything a sequel should be. The sprites are a little bit bigger. The character sprites are a little bit bigger. The character variation is better. I love playing a skate. It's ridiculous just to kick ass and then rollerblade to the next guy. It's totally wild.
It doesn't make any sense why they let that child join the street gang to fight Mr. X. Mm-hmm. It makes no sense.
Well, and the vibrant neon of the city is really cool. And some of the levels, like you mentioned, the piano bar is really, really cool. And then just the far out wacky shit.
Yeah.
The space stuff is nuts.
I mean, the baseball stadium opens up underneath, and you go into this giant, expensive, billion-dollar tunnel that'll connect to a private island, and it's like you're fighting baseball players and ninjas with jetpacks, and what?
Yeah, it just goes wild, and it's cool because how do you differentiate yourself from Final Fight? And the best way to do it is stop playing it straight, and so many of those beat-em-ups they were focused on, there's these wacky gang characters, a la the Warriors, silly characters, but the environment stayed pretty stagnant.
Yeah.
And by kind of changing things up a little bit, it really made the game stick out. And again, amazing music. That certainly helped.
Totally. I mean, I actually had a friend of mine play Street Rage 2 for the first time a little over a year ago, and he was just blown away. Of course, we used a Game Genie, just so we could, I wanted to show him the entire game, and even though we had unlimited lives, you would think that would cheapen a beat-em-up. But he was all in. He's like, holy crap, where are we going next? Every step, you wanted to know what was going to happen next, and all the while, the music was just pushing you forward, even in better accomplishment, the best music in the series, the best gameplay in the series, and, it's a shame we never see Max again. He was a pretty cool character. even though he was a total Mike Hagar ripoff. Then there was Streets of Rage 3. It was released 13 months after Streets of Rage 2. Sega was very eager to cash in to the Streets of Rage series, and it shows. Yuzo Koshiro would actually produce far fewer tracks for Streets of Rage 3, with Motohiro Kawashima producing the majority of the soundtrack. Oba, the director of the previous two, would now become the co-designer with Ineo Koshiro. Alex, Blaze, and Eddie would return, though Adam and Max were replaced by Dr. Zane, an enemy from Streets of Rage 2, who used his robot arms to shoot energy balls. A boxing kangaroo named Rue was also playable if certain requirements were met. The game played more as an expansive Streets of Rage 2, though it did include a number of new moves such as dashing and dodging. The gameplay was made to be overall faster, and players could upgrade their power of their attacks based on performance. The timer from the previous titles was removed, though endings were based off of time. The story revolved around Mr. X founding a company called RoboPsi Corporation. Both he and Dr. Dom would create human-like robots to replace the top city officials. Mr. X then planted dozens of bombs around the city to allow his evil plot to go uninterrupted. Now it's up to our heroes to find the bombs and rescue Dr. Dom. Streets of Rage 3 had 4 different endings, ranging from the happy ending where the city is saved, to 2 where Mr. X gets away, and a bad ending where the city is destroyed by the bombs. The game was received with mixed to positive reviews, with many being confused by the story and frustrated by the timer-based ending. The music was also criticized as well below the previous games. Koshiro had attempted to utilize a new method called automated composing system to create faster music and more beats per measure. But unfortunately, it just didn't work out. Streets of Rage 3. I liked it when I was a kid.
Streets of Rage 3 isn't a bad game.
No.
I've heard some people say that it's their favorite Streets of Rage, and
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine. One thing you can say is the gameplay's probably the best as far as the fighting goes. It's faster, it doesn't have that stiffness that the earlier games have. The sprites are bigger, so it's easier to see what's going on screen. But it's probably the ultimate testament to saying that gameplay isn't everything, because it's missing something. It doesn't have that magic.
The environments just aren't there.
Yeah.
Like, the environments just are not interesting. You're just like running through hallways with doors at one point. It's like, Jesus. I mean, there's still like areas where it looks like a traditional Japanese environment, and that's kind of cool. But we'd seen that so frequently, whereas previously we're going on pirate ships and we're going on, alien rides, and we're going up an elevator on this private island. That was so cool. I mean, it tried to like diversify their environments, like having barrels fall from the sky and people on motorcycles, but it just seemed so busy, and I couldn't understand what the hell was going on with the story, Even though I still think it's an okay game, it's pretty obvious why they put the kibosh on Streets of Rage for a while, because fans at the time were not happy, even though I loved it.
Again, Sega, they love to bungle things too. Streets of Rage 3, one of the biggest problems with it is not a lot of people played it, and not a lot of people played it because not a lot of people knew that it existed. It came out really, really, really late in the Sega Genesis life, if I remember. It came out in 1994, I want to say?
It did, yeah.
Which is super, super late for the Genesis.
I mean, that's the same year PlayStation would come out in Japan.
Yeah, to give it some context. That's crazy. So, unlike Streets of Rage 2, which almost everyone I knew with the Genesis had, no one I knew had Streets of Rage 3. I didn't play it until years later. And even now, if you want to buy an original cartridge, that's a lot of money.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's.
I got one.
Well, good. You got $50 or $60 on eBay then, which probably more now because I haven't checked in a long time.
I will never sell it. I just can't.
But yeah, it was a pricey cart. I've seen it go for, $30, $40, $50, $60. Probably a lot more now because Sega Genesis games have been going up in price. So it's an end of the system's lifespan game. It's kind of rare. You don't see it a lot. It's not as good as the previous ones. So yeah, it's just something that you can easily kind of forget exists.
I mean, when you listen to the music now, I think it's really incredible music. But at the time, it just kind of felt like thrash techno. Like we just had no context for what we were experiencing. And I think it actually does show the music could continue without Koshiro. Like they'd put everything on Koshiro for the music, but Kawashima actually produced the majority of these tracks, and they're excellent. And I assume that new method probably limited him in terms of his ability to compose comprehensive tracks, but with faster gameplay and faster music, it is a consistent product. But if you're comparing it from part 2 to part 3, man, when has part 3 ever been the best of anything? You know? Core Design, who were popular for their work with Lara Croft, actually wanted to make a 3D version of Streets of Rage, but they could not come to terms with Sega. They eventually stripped it of the license and released it as Fighting Force on the 64 and PS2, or on the 64 and PS1. The game was mixed with negative reviews, and its sequel on the Dreamcast is often referred to as one of the worst games of all time. Yeah. So what happened to Streets of Rage? Well, there was a plan to make a Streets of Rage 4 for the Sega Dreamcast. In fact, there were actually demos. Alex fought off a group of enemies, and it did seem to have similar gameplay as well as a new first-person mode, and it was in 3D, and then it vanished. No one knows why. Then, a 3D remake was going to be developed by Grin, but the studio closed down. There was just more and more rumors that they were working on one as recently as like 2011. That might have been the Grin one, and it got canceled again. Streets of Rage is a dead series, and it's so bizarre to me that of all the series Sega stopped doing anything with, I understand why they're not making Shenmue 3. It breaks my heart, but I get it. They tried it, and it failed. But Streets of Rage was pretty profitable for them, and Streets of Rage as a series was so impressive because it was only on the console. Yeah, it went to arcades, but basically you're putting a quarter to play a Genesis. So, it was a console exclusive that actually made you want to buy a Genesis. It was awesome. Like, all 3 of them are great games, but some are better than others. So where's our Streets of Rage 4?
Can I play armchair game dev for a second?
Okay, go.
Okay, if I was Sega right now, I'd look at a game like Double Dragon Neon and go, God damn, that was good.
I love Double Dragon Neon.
And then I would farm my game out to a small studio like Way Forward, like Yacht Club Games, like Digital Devolver. These are studios who they work a lot with like retro style, simple gameplay, cool aesthetic, great music.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're also known for creating great products. So, you're getting something quality. Small studio, again, just as a digital download game. There you go. That's what you should do with Streets of Rage.
It's just crazy that we have not seen anything with Streets of Rage since 1994. Mm-hmm. Like, that's literally over 20 years ago.
I would say it's not crazy only because Sega.
This is Sega month, and we love Sega, but we gotta be realistic. Sega, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah, I just don't get them most of the time. And,
well,
I guess that's okay.
After developing Man XTT Superbike for the Sega Saturn, Moto Yoshida, remember him, was eager to get back to his beat-em-up roots. Observing the power of Sega's new arcade machines, Yoshida teamed up with the Sega Technical Institute. They were the studio responsible for Comic Zone and the Ooze to create a new 3D beat-em-up. It would be the final game before Sega Technical Institute dissolved.
Roger, we got a bad situation down there. We got a band of terrorists that have seized control of the building. They're holding 30 hostages inside, including the president's daughter. I repeat, they have the president's daughter in there. We have to get her out as soon as possible. Over.
Die Hard Arcade, or Dynamite Deca, would feature similar environments and characters to the popular 1980s action movie, but the minute-by-minute gameplay didn't resemble the film at all. 2 players, including John McClane and Chris Thompson, would fight robots, firemen, and greased-up bodybuilders. The reason it differed so much from the original film was because it was never designed to be a Die Hard game. In Japan, the 2 characters are Bruno and Cindy. The game's hand-to-hand combat played much more like Virtual Fighter, with quick combos being the main attack. Players could move in any direction, though the game would automatically lock onto the nearest enemy. Unlike previous Sega Beat Em Ups, guns were frequently used. Handguns, sniper rifles, and even bazookas could be used on enemies. More traditional weapons, such as a staff or furniture, could be used, as well as comedic items like pepper shakers and lighters. Enemies were also quirky. A sumo wrestler, a lucha libre, and the evil laser-packing spider bots served as bosses. In between fights, quick-time events would play out, requiring players to quickly respond to the events. A near-perfect arcade port was released in Japan and America for the Sega Saturn in 1997. To this day, Die Hard Arcade is one of the most common arcade machines of the late 90s. Yeah, I remember the crap out of Die Hard Arcade because when I thought 3D beat 'em ups, I said they all suck. Except for Die Hard Arcade. That's the one thing you could say about
the
it.
asterisk.
Yeah. Now, did you have it on the Saturn?
I have it now on the Saturn.
Why? What made you go out and buy a copy so long after the fact?
That's actually one of the reasons why I got a Saturn, was so I could play Die Hard Arcade. I love Die Hard Arcade.
You were putting it over hard.
I am putting it over super, super hard, and I can't even justify why. It's just got this special it to it where it's so batshit insane, but it's not conscious of how insane it actually is.
Right.
Like, it's not winking at the camera. It's just, accept me.
It's like The Room.
Yeah, it's very The Room-esque. Also, the combat, it's got this stiffness to it. Almost like Streets of Rage, but in a way that feels really good. It gives the punches a lot of impact.
There's definitely momentum because you keep edging forward with every
Yeah.
punch. You're just like, pat, 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 pat.
Well, and a great comparison would be to say like something like Fighting Force, where
Ugh.
it feels like your arms are just like giant balloons full of mayonnaise, like just slowly moving through the air and thunking off of people.
This is basically like the prime portobello mushroom and prime rib, whereas Fighting Force was Manwich, where someone forgot to buy meat. You know,
Yeah,
It's-
basically. That's a pretty good
This
way
game,
to say it.
no matter how crazy it got, it was tight, really, really tight. Like, and there's just when you picked up a gun, you didn't have to worry about aiming. That auto aim was like, well, I have an anti-tank sniper rifle, and I'm going to shoot this fireman straight in the face before the fire hose of the fire truck that's backing up and forth and shooting water at me is going to get me. I mean, seriously, what the hell is going on in this game?
Yeah, and the fact that like they got the Die Hard license, it's just like it was almost like they were just in a room and they're like, "Hey, what's an action movie?" I don't know, Die Hard, and then they just went and bought the license for it.
It's like foxes across the country going, hey, what's like a video game developer? Oh, Sega, and it's, peanut butter and chocolate, and it's wonderful. And the QuickTime events are hilarious if you rewatch them. There's one where you
Yeah.
just nail a woman in the face and it says success, but I don't think you ever fight that woman in the game. It
No.
doesn't make any sense.
And again, I think, as far as I know, that's one of the earliest, if not the earliest, instance of a QuickTime event in an action game.
A traditional QuickTime event,
Yeah.
whereas Dragon's Lair never gave you visual hints.
Yeah.
This was 1997.
And I don't really think I mean, Dragon's Lair isn't really an action game. It's just a QuickTime game,
Basically.
And it's funny, too, because I hate QuickTime events in games,
Yeah.
but they don't bother me in Die Hard Arcade. I'm just totally okay with it. I'm okay with everything that it does.
I think it has a lot to do with the QuickTime events being segmented. You completed this room, now you're going to run in the next room, and you know there's going to be a QuickTime event. Whereas when you play a game now, I feel like your controller's just resting on the ground, and then you see buttons pop up, and you go, oh, I got to pick it back up. Like Die Hard Arcade just told you not to put the controller down. You always want to go to the next room and pick up a fire axe and bash somebody's heads in, and the game was nuts. I mean, even from the opening cutscene where they're talking about the president's daughter is kidnapped on the skyscraper and you see the villain.
I don't care about the SWAT members. Where is the president's daughter?
That's not the villain from Die Hard. And
No.
it just periodically cuts back to him being like,
It
where are you
actually
with-
looks like the villain from, like, Big Trouble in Little China. It's
Totally.
Just, you're just like, what? Who is this?
bald guy with a white beard, and he's always like, where are we at with that safe? Did you open the safe yet? That's all you see during the cutscenes. And he'll just show up and just shoot a rocket at you and then run away, and you see him with the safe again and the president's daughter. Game is nuts.
Someone help me! I'm hiding in the president's office. Someone help me!
So the cat has found the mouse.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. But again, really, really tight gameplay, and It's hard. It's hard as nails.
Yeah.
Like, that's not something, it's not a game where you can just waltz in and just beat it in a couple hours. Like, you need to master the combat, understand the enemies, and it takes time.
I also love how almost everything can hurt everyone. There's that bathroom sequence where if you're fighting an enemy and one of the guys just kicks the door off the stall, if it hits the enemy, it'll more likely kill the enemy. And it's just that kind of chaotic fun. Such a good game. But unfortunately, never re-released inside of North America for the most part. I mean, Die Hard Arcade is a license. You'll never get that version. Dynamite Deca, I believe, was re-released a few different times through the Sega Ages program, where they fix up games and they polish them up a little bit. But no, not in America. Such a shame. In 1999, Makoto Oshida directed a sequel for arcades and the Dreamcast called Dynamite Cop.
We have a situation down there. Some modern-day pirates have hijacked a huge cruiser. They're holding 2,000 hostages inside, including the president's daughter. We have to invade the ship, clear the pirates, and rescue the hostages, especially the president's daughter.
The sequel would not use the Die Hard property even when it was released in America. The evil wolf White Fang Hongo would once again kidnap the president's daughter, though this time the game would take place on a cruise ship with over 2,000 hostages. Players could pick from the returning Bruno, the brand new Jen, or Eddie. The game was far more quirky, with weapons such as mannequin heads attached to sticks, cakes, fridges, exploding rice cookers, and apples, in addition to the returning guns, fire axes, and chairs. Despite being on a cruise ship, a Waterworld-like pirate environment is stored in the center of the ship. At one point, you fight a giant octopus. The game also has a few Sega references, including a caged chicken leg from Golden Axe. Dynamite Cop is one of those Dreamcast games that even hardcore Dreamcast owners don't really know about. It received a very limited print in 2000, and if you had a chance to play it, you would just tell your friends and you would look like a madman. Did you ever play Dynamite Cop?
No, I only played it after the fact. I didn't play it, like, during the Dreamcast era. And
Same here.
I wish I would have known, because I love Die Hard Arcade, and if I would have known that there was a sequel or a spiritual sequel, I would have loved to have played it. And I played it later, and I mentioned earlier that Die Hard Arcade is crazy, but then you also have the sense that it doesn't know how crazy it is.
Yeah.
When you play Dynamite Cop goes, "Oh, I'm fucking insane, watch this."
When you're fighting a chef in the kitchen and you're throwing fridges and rice cookers that just explode in his face, or when you're using, like a sniper rifle to take down a squid that's just in the center of the ship for no reason. I mean, it's pure madness.
It's completely batshit insane. Another thing, too, that they really stressed was in Die Hard Arcade, it was cool because you could pick up all kinds of shit to use as weapons, whether it was guns or fire axes or just whatever, but there's a lot of things lying around that you grab onto. And Dynamite Cop, if I remember correctly, they kind of took that to the next level.
Totally.
Where almost everything is a weapon.
Yeah.
If it's not, if it's not nailed down, you can probably, and even if it is nailed down, you could probably punch it a few times and then use it as a weapon. Everything is a weapon.
Yeah. I mean, I think the environments are maybe a bit smaller than they were in Die Hard Arcade, but that's actually to its credit, because when you DDT a man through a couch, it's a clusterfuck. A beautiful clusterfuck. I love Dynamite Cop.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I don't like it as much as Die Hard Arcade.
Well, it is shorter, and I will say it doesn't require as much skill.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. I think it's entirely possible to play through it on normal difficulty after your first or second try with the game.
Oh, yeah.
It's not that hard.
Hour and a half long.
Yeah, it's short, and that's not necessarily to say it's not a full experience, but with Die Hard Arcade, you kind of had to get a feel for the game, and you really had to work through it and think about, okay, how am I going to approach these enemies? How am I going to approach this boss? And in Dynamite Cop, you don't need as much strategy. You can just kind of blow through it, and it's just kind of a fun, crazy thrill ride.
There is a sort of irony that the game that had arcade in the title feels a little bit more focused for longer play than the game that, doesn't have arcade in the title.
But yeah, it's totally cool, and if you are a Dreamcast owner, or you just like to download Dreamcast ROMs if that's your thing, it's something you should definitely check out. It's hard to find. I don't see it used a lot.
No.
I've only seen a few copies here and there, and I know like you mentioned, it had a limited run. So I'm guessing if you do find it on eBay or something, it's going to be a little more than you're going to want to pay.
Totally.
But yeah, if you see it, it's totally worth picking up. It's a great game. Have a couple beers with your friends and just play through it and just kind of watch the craziness unfold.
Makoto Yoshida would go on to direct his first online game, Alien Friend Online, one of the first console games with voice chat, and the widely panned Project Altered Beast on the PlayStation 2. Currently, no one knows what Yoshida is doing, though he still works at Sega. But that wasn't the end for Dynamite Deca. Dynamite Deca EX, or Asian Dynamite, was released in 2006. This is a little-known game that I didn't learn about until right before recording. I watched the Let's Play. It serves as the sequel to the original, and it mostly is more of a remake, changing the aesthetics to a Chinese theme. In fact, the game was developed in China. The game once again featured Bruno and 2 new characters, Caroline and Jennifer. Each character could transform into 3 unique power-up characters for a total of 9 additional power-up characters. These include a jester, a pro wrestler, a drunken master, and Bruno could transform into a man named Jihad. It included more ancient Chinese stages featuring a fighting stone giant, though most stages were the original stages with a different aesthetic. Wolf would once again return as the villain, only this time he would become a cyborg. Once defeated, he would fire a giant rocket, and a giant octopus attached to the rocket would snatch him up and send him screaming. The final image is of a chef who hands you a plate of eggs with the words "Game Over" written in ketchup. It was never ported outside of arcades and only released in Japan and Europe using the Naomi arcade systems. It is one of the ultimate Sega curios. I'm assuming you never heard of that.
No, I had no idea that existed.
Asian Dynamite.
That's really weird. That's crazy. I was just sitting over here just like kind of making faces at you. What the fuck? Yeah, that's totally wild.
And that really is, for all intents and purposes, the last of the Sega Beat Em Ups. Though, a select number of fans would go on to create Beasts of Rage, a fan-created version of Streets of Rage for the Dreamcast, which Sega issued a cease and desist to end the game's development. Though if you're online, you can still find copies. Or just download the code and burn it.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Streets of Rage actually has a pretty cool like fan and modding community.
Totally.
So if you like Streets of Rage or you enjoy beat 'em up games, that's something definitely worth Googling, checking out. Some of the fan made stuff, from what I've heard, I haven't played a lot, is supposedly really good, really cool. But yeah, it's kind of sad because it's been nice to go back and talk about these games that I loved as a kid. But it's weird because they all sort of, each series ends tragically, which is kind of a bummer.
The reason they stopped making these games is because the last one's really bad. And that's just sad way to live, man. It's unfortunate because when you look back at Sega and its influence on the beat 'em up and games as a whole, it's humongous. I mean, the world of Golden Axe and its fantasy setting took fantasy out of the RPGs and into true hacking and slashing. Sure, there was Gauntlet previously to that, but this was the very first time a more simple game could offer fantasy combat. And then there was Streets of Rage, which to this day is a timeless classic with incredible music that, trust me, you want to listen to. And finally, Dynamite Deca was pure craziness and still one of the only 3D beat 'em ups that's any good. And trust me, it's good. Of course, the Yakuza series would be a sort of beat 'em up, but if you ask me, that's more of an RPG and exploration game. That's why we're ending the series right there. So, Steve, all in all, your favorite beat 'em up out of this collection of Sega beat 'em ups? Altered Beast doesn't really count, but we had to bring it up because it was
it makes sense to kind of set the foundation.
Influencing factor.
Oh man, that's tough.
I'm just gonna say Streets of Rage 2.
That's the right answer.
But is it the personal one?
No, mine is Die Hard Arcade.
That's an awesome answer.
I don't care. The correct answer is Streets of Rage 2. Die Hard Arcade all fucking day.
Yeah, it's Die Hard. I think if you never played any video games and you only had an opportunity to play Streets of Rage or Die Hard Arcade, you would have a full life. These are two wildly different games, but they both consist of a gameplay style that is mostly long forgotten in this day and age. Intense, hyper-focused, minute-to-minute progression through the end of your fist. I love them. Love them. So yeah. Well, I think that'll do it for the very first episode of the Pressure Pass. Sega month is going to continue all month long, so check back. We'll be doing these periodically, and if you are subscribed to PressureCast, then you'll be getting these episodes once a week or so. Steve, where can people reach you?
You can reach me on Twitter at Steve Cuff, and I also write for OptimismVaccine.com, or you can go to YouTube, youtube.com/OptimismVaccine.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, you can obviously reach me at Dr. Krychop on Twitter. And, yeah, just check back. Please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and YouTube. Remember, the past is forever.